G'day Internet and welcome back to another video. Now, of all the consoles that I own or have owned over the years, my number one favourite will always be the Sega Master System. It's the first console I ever got. It's the brand that I grew up with. It was first the Master System and then the Mega Drive. And it's always been my favourite. But in the modern world, we're always looking for ways of connecting it to modern TVs and so on and so forth. So that's one of the things we're actually going to cover today. And we're also going to add to this one of the things that was missing in most Western releases of the Master System, and that was FM sound. So let's get to it. So here is my Master System 1. It's not in bad shape. It's got a few bumps and scratches on it, but you know, it is 30-something years old. And the simplest way of getting better than composite video out of this machine is simply with a SCART cable. Now you can buy these off the shelf. I did actually attempt to make my own, and the circuitry that's inside this plug, which is basically a series of resistors and capacitors. And well, there's one example that I tried to make and they all kind of failed. So I ended up cheating and simply buying one off the shelf, because I discovered you can buy these for about $17 Australian. And at that price, it simply wasn't worth the hassle of dealing with trying to make my own. But even if you then run it through something like this, which is a SCART to HDMI upscaler, this is the one that everyone seems to recommend. Straight out of the machine, the picture quality isn't all that fantastic. There's some really weird patterns that appear, especially kind of in the light blues, and the jail bars, the vertical lines, also known as jail bars, are really quite apparent. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly put up a photo that I took as a close-up shot of what I'm talking about. And you can see the squiggly lines in the light blue and also the quite prominent vertical lines. So what can we do about that? Well, these cables also work on a Mega Drive 1 as well, and I was playing around with my Mega Drive and doing a bunch of research online, and there was one little line that led me down a path on a forum post which said to lift a leg off the video processor, and what that was removing the sub-carrier signal for the composite sync. Now these, with SCART, you've got your RGB, but you've also got what's called C-Sync, and that's the synchronization of the signal. Okay, and they basically rely on just the regular, good old-fashioned composite signal that you would normally plug into your television. However, composite signal is actually quite dirty and can put in a lot of just mess into the signal quality. And by removing that subcarrier on the Mega Drive, it drastically improved the image quality. So that got me thinking, and I did some poking around, and I found that the main mixing, we'll call it the mixing chip because it's not actually the video chip, in this, which is a Sony chip, has a composite out which is wired directly to the AV plug on the back, but it does actually have also available from it just a regular C-Sync signal as well, without all the extra guff. And with some poking around, I discovered that switching the composite pin on this from the composite signal to the genuine C-Sync signal made a massive, massive difference. The downside is you basically end up killing your composite signal out the back, but we'll get to that later. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off by pulling this thing to pieces, and I'm going to show you where on the board I'm talking about in regards to the composite and the C-Sync. All right, there's our board, but to show you what I'm actually getting at, we're going to have to remove the heatsink for the power regulator. Right, there's our motherboard. And this chip that I'm talking about is this Sony CXA1145 here. From this chip, there's various signals that come in and out of it. We've got VCC at both pins at one end, ground at both pins at the other end. And then on this side here, from ground, it's got RGB and composite. And that pin, that composite pin there, is actually wired through some resistors and stuff like that to the composite pin just on the plug on the back. And I traced it through, and the easiest place to disconnect that is the top of this component just here. And if we go along the bottom, the second last pin here is actually our C-Sync signal. So if you really wanted to, you could simply snip that out, wire from that pin to the composite pin here, and off you go. But the thing is, then you kill composite. You'll have no composite whatsoever, and all you'll be able to do is run the SCART. Now, I don't want to do that. I still want to be able to run composite when I want to. I do have some old CRTs that I occasionally like to pull out and plug my old consoles into. So we're going to go about it slightly differently. We are going to start, however, by lifting the top end of this component just here. All right, so we've lifted that there, and all we need now is a pair of pliers, and I just want to straighten up the end of that because we're going to eventually be soldering to it. Now, what we're going to do is, so it's pin, I think it's pin 2 on the DIN connector here is the composite out, so going out of the machine. And what we're essentially going to do is we're going to put a switch in to be able to switch between its source. So one position will be from the composite signal coming out of the 1145 through its various resistors or whatever and ending here, and that will go in. And the other position will be from the C-Sync, which is that one just there that we were talking about a moment ago. So what are we going to need? Well, we're going to need a two-way switch, okay? And we're going to need some wire. And that's kind of about it. So I've got my always present rainbow wire that I use for kind of everything. Let's get a piece of this, like so. Now, in the case, this is probably going to get mounted underneath the board somewhere like that. So how you decide to route your cable is up to you. I'm probably going to go from here around and to the cable. So I'm going to want a fair length, and already that's not long enough. Right. Here's my ribbon cable. Get rid of that short bit so I don't get confused. And let me grab my magnifiers so I don't make a complete mess of this. Like so. Let's get the tips of these tinned to begin with, and we can go from there. Right, so the wire's going to sit roughly here, but obviously one of them needs to stretch over to the C-sync, which actually makes the other two a bit shorter. We can loop it around a bit. Okay, that's fine. All right, so what we want to do now is prep the board side of it. So we want to tin, it's the second one in on the bottom here, and that's our C-sync. So let me get that tinned. And we also want to tin the top of this, I think it's a ferrite bead. Oh, it's called FB7, so we're going to go with ferrite bead. We want to tin the top of that. And we also want to tin the hole that we pulled it out of, because that's the easiest place to get straight to the composite pin on the DIN connector. Right, so what's next? What I do want to do is I want to put just a little bit of heat shrink where we go onto the ferrite bead, because it's going to be sitting quite close to where it was, so I guess it doesn't really matter. Okay, it's going to be easiest, I think, to actually do the composite pin first, so let's come in from this angle. Without melting anything around it. Oh, come on. Right, got it. Then I think we will do the one that goes to the ferrite bead. Right. And let's just get that heat shrink down on it, and very carefully with the use of a lighter shrink that down, and remembering our cable's going to come this way, we'll get this wire onto the C-sync. Right, done. Now we want to wire up our switch. So let's try and get a better idea of how much cable length I want. Given a bit of slack, let's go for that much. And once again, trim and tip the ends. Right, so we know that the purple wire goes to our DIN connector. So it's going to go to the center position of this switch. So let's get it tinned now. I'll bring in my third hand for this. Okay, so what I say, purple to the center. I'll get this tinned first. Right. Purple to the center. And the other two don't really matter because one's simply one position and one's the other. Right, so we now have our two-way switch wired up. I guess now is a good time as any to test it and make sure that what I've done actually, works. Okay, quick addendum. When I was working this out last night, I was working on the reverse side of the board and obviously it messed me up. It's not the second pin from here, it's the second pin from here. I got the road right, I just got the end wrong. So it's that one there, pin number 2 from there, and it's actually pin number 11 if you're interested. Okay, so it's working. I've got it hooked into my Elgato HD60, and hopefully here, this is with the normal composite signal connected. So hopefully you can see the lines and maybe even those patterns in the light blue background. And if I turn it off, switch it and turn it back on again, and now there's still some slight jail bars there if I look on my big screen, but those patterns have certainly disappeared. So I think that's a really good result. Right, so there is our little composite switcher all wired up. We'll worry about mounting it in a minute because the next thing is FM sound. Now, a gentleman in Sydney, Tim, also known as E-Tim, makes a kit which adds FM sound to a normal non-Japanese master system. And if we have a look in the kit that is sent, I'll get it out of the packet, right? What we have is the actual board with a wire that needs tapping into the actual motherboard. We've got our header edge connector which goes onto the expansion port here eventually, and then we've got a switch which I believe is actually a region switch. So let's start by, how do I want to do this? How long is this cable? All right, that's fine. So what we'll do is we'll start by putting the header for the switch on like so, and that will eventually plug in there. So let's get that on first. And let's straighten these up a little. Yep, that's good. All right, let's get the other two soldered up. Right, done. Okay, that was easy, we're all done. I only wish. So the trick with this, and the reason this is separate, is because of the shape of the case. This can't sit just bolt upright. It just doesn't have the clearance. So what we need to do is we need to grab the base, oh, I already put it together, and temporarily sit this back in here. And what we want to do is we want to put the header on. Like so. And then we want to put this onto the pins, okay, like that. And we're trying to work out the angle that this is going to sit. Now, going by the photos, basically just kind of sitting there, so the bottom row of pins is just visible, should, in theory, be enough. So if I carefully drop that back on, nothing fouls, doesn't foul the cartridge port or anything, and if I lift it but carefully back off, that's where it needs to be. So what I'm going to do is, a bit like I just did with those header pins, I'm just going to tack a couple in place so it holds, and I might do a bottom one. Right, and then we'll lift the motherboard back out. We'll carefully remove that, remove this, and now we can set to work soldering all these pins. So this is going to take a bit, so let's do a bit of that fast forward action. Okay, that's all those soldered up. I'm pretty happy with all that. Give it a quick squeeze. Yep, good. Right. So that can now go on there. We've got one last thing we need to do, and that's wire in this wire here, which I believe has something to do with the sound mixing, with the onboard sound. And enables it to basically behave as if it was always there. Okay, so we're back in the same neck of the woods where we were working a minute ago near this CXA 1145. We have a capacitor here, C62. Now, we need to snip that out. This is the wire here that comes from the FM board. The white wire needs to go to what was the negative leg of the capacitor. The red goes to what was the positive leg of the capacitor, and the shielding needs to be soldered to the bottom leg here of what I think is C59, but it's this ceramic capacitor just here, so it needs to go to there. I'm going to just put some heat shrink on the shielding because I don't want it to touch anything else. And then I guess we'll get snipping and soldering. Okay, so I've gone ahead and I've put some heat shrink on the shielding and also tinned the tips of this. The first job is going to be snipping out this, this capacitor. So it's C62. So very carefully, and while we're at it, we can put some fresh solder on those two pads. And also we need to solder to the bottom of this ceramic capacitor here, the one closest to the CXA chip. So let's get some solder on that too. Come on. Right. So I'm going to start with the shielding because it's the one I'm least happy about the soldering position. Let me just trim that just a smidge. All right, that's in. And what did we say? White goes to what was the negative side of the capacitor and red to the other. I haven't really given myself huge amounts of room to work here, but let's do the red. Okay, and the white. And we're done. Okay, so that's the FM board wired up. We've got the little switch that it came with. Oh, it actually needs soldering up as well. So I'll quickly do that. And then we'll come back to actually mounting the switches. Okay, so after playing with some cable routing ideas, I've decided to mount them down here. And I've simply, the composite cable I've routed down and through and under, and same with the FM sound switch. And we're going to mount them down here because we've got obviously plenty of space to play with. So if we kind of take a look, I want to kind of keep it relatively neat and have them here. I want to keep them here, and so like any good drilling a hole job, I'm going to do a completely freehand, but I am going to start with some pilot holes, and I'm going to use my pin vise for that. This plastic's fairly soft, so it's fairly easy to do. And the other one about there. All right, now to grab the cordless drill and drill some holes. Okay, so now let's take the nuts off these. Well, one of the nuts and the washer. Same with this one. And let's mount them up. Okay, I'm going to have to remove the other nut. It's just not quite thick enough. That's better. Washer, nut. Take the other one off. Tighten these up. Right, then we can put the whole thing back together. Now that it's all back together, I guess the only thing really left to do is try some games. We're going to start off with Outrun using the FM sound, and the reason is this, is I've been playing around a little bit with it, and it's, especially with Outrun, it's a little catch-22. Now, one of the most famous things about the game Outrun is its soundtrack, and on any other machine it's fantastic. Using standard sound on the Master System, it's okay, but the music is fantastic through FM. But the sound effects, like the tyres screeching and things like that, not so much. So let's take a quick look at this, and we'll also some other ones. Well, I now have a Master System 1 with FM sound and reasonably good RGB out via SCART. Now, you can go further with the RGB to clean it up even more. There's a board you can get called an RGB bypass board, which is meant to improve it even more. But considering this basically cost a Switch, which was like $2 at JCar, I'm more than happy with the output I'm getting. There's still some jail bars there, but it's not so bad. The FM sound, now there's not that many games that support FM sound. This does give you the option of switching between on FM and Japanese FM, because for instance Wonder Boy 3, the FM sound only works in Japanese mode. But even then, for Wonder Boy at least, I found the differences were only really subtle between the normal sound and FM sound anyway. But all in all, I'm really happy with it. But don't worry, I haven't forgotten about the Master System 2. In the not too distant future, there will be an upcoming video about at least how you can make the same FM, sorry, not the FM, the RGB mods on the Master System 2. In theory, you can actually install that FM board in the Master System 2 as well, but I've only got one of those, so, and it obviously went in my Master System 1. So I hope you found that video useful, and if you liked it, click like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff, and I'll see you in the next one.